So, you're looking for a situation as a governess.
Yes, sir.
At what salary?
I had £4 a month in my last place.
With me, madam, you would commence at £100 a year.
100? What would my duties be?
Just looking after the one child and obeying any little commands from my wife. You see no difficulty in that?
None at all, sir.
For example, you would not object to wearing any dress we might care to give you?
No, sir.
Or to sit here or there? That would not be offensive to you?
Indeed not, sir.
Or, before you come to us, to cut your hair quite short.
The Copper Beeches by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Dramatised for radio by Peter Mackie. With Clive Merrison as Sherlock Holmes and Michael Williams as Dr. John Watson. And featuring Imogen Stubbs as Violet Hunter and Roger Hammond as Jeffro Rucastle. The Copper Beeches.
It was a cold morning of the early spring, and we sat after breakfast on either side of a cheery fire in the old room at Baker Street. A thick fog rolled down between the lines of dun-coloured houses, and the opposing windows loomed like dark, shapeless blurs through the heavy yellow wreaths. Sherlock Holmes had been silent all the morning, dipping continuously into the advertisement columns of a succession of papers, until at last, having apparently given up his search, he had emerged in no very sweet temper to lecture me upon my literary shortcomings.
I suppose you can hardly be open to a charge of sensationalism, Watson, for out of those cases which you've been so kind as to interest yourself in, a fair proportion do not treat of crime in its legal sense at all. The small matter in which I endeavoured to help the King of Bohemia, the singular experience of Miss Mary Sutherland, and the problem connected with a man with a twisted lip, and the incident of the noble bachelor, were all matters which are outside the pale of the law. But in avoiding the sensational, I fear that you may have bordered on the trivial.
The end may have been so, but the methods I hold to have been novel and of interest.
Oh, my dear fellow, what of the public, the great unobservant public who could hardly tell a weaver by his tooth or a compositor by his left thumb care about the finer shades of analysis and deduction? But indeed, if you are trivial, I cannot blame you, for the days of the great cases are past. Man, or at least criminal man, has lost all enterprise and originality. As to my own little practice, it seems to me to be degenerating into an agency for recovering lost lead pencils and giving advice to young ladies from boarding schools.
Oh, my dear fellow, I hardly think it has come to that.
No? This note I had this morning marks my 0 point, I fancy. I'll read it.
Dear Mr. Holmes, I'm very anxious to consult you as to whether I should or should not accept a situation which has been offered to me as a governess. I shall call at 10:30 tomorrow if I do not inconvenience you. Yours faithfully, Violet Hunter. Do you know the young lady?
Not I.
It is 10:30 now.
Well, then I have no doubt it was she who rang the bell.
It may turn out to be of more interest than you think. You remember that the affair of the blue carbuncle, which appeared to be a mere whim at first, developed into a serious investigation. It may be so in this case also.
Well, let us hope so. Come. Miss Hunter, I presume?
Mr. Holmes?
Indeed. May I introduce my friend and colleague, Dr. Watson,
Miss Hunter?
who may well be able to throw some light on your problem?
You will excuse me troubling you, I'm sure. But I have had a very strange experience, and as I have no parents or relations of any sort from whom I could ask advice, I thought that perhaps you would be kind enough to tell me what I should do.
Pray take a seat, Miss Hunter. We shall be happy to do anything we can to serve you.
I think you would find this chair the most suitable.
Thank you.
Now then, tell me about this strange experience.
I should perhaps begin by telling you I have been a governess for 5 years in the family of Colonel Spence Munro. But 2 months ago, the Colonel received an appointment in Nova Scotia, so that I found myself without a situation. At last, the little money which I'd saved began to run short, and I was at my wits' end as to what I should do.
How did you resolve the situation?
There is a well-known agency for governesses in the West End called Westaways, and there I used to call about once a week in order to see whether anything had turned up which might suit me. Westaway was the name of the founder of the business, but it is really managed by Miss Stoper. Well, when I called last week, I was shown into the little office as usual, but I found that Miss Stoper was not alone. A prodigiously stout man, with a very smiling face and a great heavy chin which rolled down in fold upon fold over his throat, sat at her elbow with a pair of glasses on his nose. As I came in, he gave quite a jump in his chair and turned quickly to Miss Stoper.
That will do. I couldn't ask for anything better. Capital, capital.
You will take a seat, Miss Hunter.
Thank you, Miss Stoper.
You're looking for a situation, miss?
Yes, sir.
As a governess.
Yes, sir.
And what salary do you ask?
Well, I had £4 a month in my last place with Colonel Spence Munro.
Oh, no, dear me, no. How could anyone offer so pitiful a sum to a lady with such attractions and accomplishments?
My accomplishments, sir, may be less than you imagine. Some French, a little German, music and drawing.
That's all quite beside the question. Your salary with me, madam, would commence at £100 a year.
100? £100?
It's also my custom to advance to my young ladies half their salary beforehand, so that they may meet any little expenses of their journey and wardrobe. So, what do you say?
I hardly know. May I ask where you live, sir?
Hampshire. It's a charming rural place. The Copper Beech is 5 miles on the far side of Winchester. It's the most lovely country, my dear young lady, and the dearest old country house.
And my duties, sir, I should be glad to know what they would be.
One child, one dear little romper, just 6 years old. Oh, if you could see him, killing cockroaches with a slipper. Smack, smack, smack. 3 gone before you could wink.
My sole duties, then, are to take charge of a single child?
No, not the soul, my dear young lady. Your duty would be to obey any little commands my wife might give, provided always that they were such commands as a lady might with propriety obey. You see no difficulty here?
Oh, I should be happy to make myself useful.
Quite so. In dress now, for example, we are faddy people. You know, faddy, but kind-hearted. If you were asked to wear any dress which we might give you, you would not object to our little whim, eh?
No.
Or to sit here or sit there? That would not be offensive to you?
Oh, no.
Or to cut your hair quite short before you came to us?
Cut my hair? I'm afraid that is quite impossible.
I'm afraid it is quite essential. It's a little fancy of my wife's, and ladies' fancies, you know, madam, ladies' fancies must be consulted. And so you won't cut your hair?
No, sir, I really could not.
Oh, very well. Then that quite settles the matter. It is a pity, because in other respects you really would have done very nicely. In that case, Miss Stoper, I had best inspect a few more of your young ladies.
Certainly, Mr. Rucastle. One moment, Miss Hunter. Do you desire your name to be kept upon our books?
If you please.
Really? It seems rather useless, since you refuse the most excellent offer in this fashion. You can hardly expect us to exert ourselves to find another such opening for you. Good day to you, Miss Hunter.
I am sure you can well imagine how I felt when I got back to my lodgings, Mr. Holmes. Little enough in the cupboard and 2 or 3 bills upon the table. I began to ask myself whether I had not done a very foolish thing. Very few governesses in England are getting £100 a year. Besides, what use is my hair to me?
But I think... that is, you have the most attractive hair.
I concede it is a rather peculiar tint of chestnut, and friends have been kind enough to refer to it as being luxuriant. But many people are improved by wearing their hair short. and perhaps I should be among their number. Well, by the next day, I was inclined to think I had made a mistake, and by the day after, I was sure of it. I had almost overcome my pride so far as to go back to the agency and inquire whether the place was still open, when I received this letter from the gentleman himself. Dear Miss Hunter, Miss Stoper has very kindly given me your address, and I write from here to ask you whether you have reconsidered your decision. My wife is very anxious
that you should come, for she has been much attracted by my description of you. We're willing to give £120 a year so as to recompense you for any little inconvenience our fads may cause you. They're not very exacting after all. My wife is fond of a particular shade of electric blue and would like you to wear such a dress indoors in the morning. You need not, however, go to the expense of purchasing this, as we have one belonging to my dear daughter Alice now in Philadelphia, which should, I think, fit you very well. Then, as to sitting here or there, or amusing yourself in any manner indicated, that need cause you no inconvenience. As regards your hair, it is no doubt a pity, especially as I could not help remarking its beauty during our short interview. But I'm afraid that I must remain firm upon this point, and I only hope the increased salary may recompense you for the loss. Your duties as far as the child is concerned are very light.
Now do try to come, and I shall meet you with the dog cart at Winchester. Let me know your train. Yours faithfully, Jeffro Rucastle. That is the letter I have just received, Mr. Holmes, and my mind is made up that I will accept it.
Well, Miss Hunter, if your mind is made up, well, that settles the question.
But you would not advise me to refuse.
I confess, it is not a situation I should like to see a sister of mine apply for.
What is the meaning of it all, Mr. Holmes?
Well, I have no data. I cannot tell. Well, perhaps you yourself have formed some opinion.
Well, there seems to me only one possible solution. Mr. Rucastle appeared to be a very kind, good-natured man. Is it not possible that his wife is a lunatic, that he desires to keep the matter quiet for fear she should be taken into an asylum, and that he humours her fancies in every way to prevent an outbreak?
That is a possible solution. In fact, as matters stand, it's the most probable one. But in any case, it doesn't seem to be a nice household for a young lady.
But the money, Mr. Holmes, the money.
Well, yes, of course, the pay is good. It's too good. That's what makes me uneasy. Why should they give you £120 a year when they could have their pick for 40?
I thought if I told you the circumstances, you would understand afterwards if I wanted your help. I should feel so much stronger if I felt you were at the back of me.
You may carry that feeling away with you. I assure you that your little problem promises to be the most interesting which has come my way for some months. There is something distinctly novel about some of the features. If you should find yourself in doubt or danger, do not hesitate to call upon us.
Danger? What danger do you foresee?
It would cease to be a danger if we could define it. But at any time, day or night, a telegram would bring me down to your help.
That is enough. I shall go down to Hampshire quite easy in my mind now. I shall write to Mr. Rucastle at once, sacrifice my poor hair tonight, and start for Winchester tomorrow. Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, thank you. You have given me the confidence I needed. I hope I shall not have to bother you again.
For your sake, Miss Hunter, I hope that will be the case. Good day to you.
Well, at least she seems to be a young lady who is very well able to take care of herself.
And she would need to be. I am much mistaken if we do not hear from her before many days are past.
The telegram which we eventually received came late one night, just as I was thinking of turning in, and Holmes was settling down to one of those all-night chemical researches which he frequently indulged in. The summons was a brief and urgent one. Please be at the Black Swan Hotel, Winchester, midday tomorrow. Do come. I am at my wit's end. Violet Hunter.
Will you come with me?
I should wish to.
Oh, good. Look up Bradshaw, then.
Yes, of course.
Thank you. You know, Watson, had this lady gone to live in Winchester, I should never have had a fear for her. Oh, it's the 5 miles of country that makes the danger.
She is obviously not personally threatened. Not that she can get away to meet us.
Yeah.
Yes, here we are. 9:30. Gets to Winchester at 11:30.
11:30. Yeah, that'll do very nicely.
What do you think then, Holmes?
Well, I've devised 7 separate explanations, each of which would cover the facts so far as we know them, but which of these is correct can only be determined by the fresh information which awaits us in Hampshire.
But you feel that Miss Hunter is in some sort of danger?
As I said during the initial consultation, Watson, the situation offered by Mr. Jethro Rucastle of Copper Beeches was not one I should like to see a sister of mine apply for. Now, perhaps I had better postpone my analysis of the acetones. We will need to be at our best in the morning.
Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, I am so delighted that you've come.
For our part, we are much relieved to find you well and unharmed.
Hear, hear.
I thought it best to take this private sitting room for our meeting.
Most prudent. Now, pray tell us what has happened to you.
I will do so. And I must be quick, for I have promised Mr. Rucastle to be back before 3. I got his leave to come into town this morning, though he little knew for what purpose.
Now, let us have everything in its due order.
In the first place, I must say that I have met on the whole with no actual ill treatment from Mr. and Mrs. Rucastle. But I cannot understand them, and I am not easy in my mind about them.
What can you not understand?
Their reasons for their conduct. But you shall have it all just as it occurred. When I came down, Mr. Rucastle met me as arranged, and that evening introduced me to his wife and child. I found her to be a silent, pale-faced woman, much younger than her husband. Not more than 30, I should think, while he can hardly be less than 50.
How long has she been married to Rucastle?
About 7 years, I believe. I gathered from their conversation that he was a widower and that his only child by the first wife was the daughter who has gone to Philadelphia. Mr. Rucastle told me in private that the reason she had left was that she had an unreasoning aversion to her stepmother.
And your charge, the child of the present marriage?
I have never met so utterly spoilt and so ill-natured a little creature. He is small for his age, with a head which is quite disproportionately large. His whole life appears to be spent in an alternation between savage fits of passion and gloomy intervals of sulking. Giving pain to any creature weaker than himself seems to be his one idea of amusement, and he shows quite remarkable talent in planning the capture of mice, little birds, and insects. Oh, but I'd rather not talk about him, and indeed he has little to do with my story.
I'm glad of all details, whether they seem to you to be relevant or not.
I shall try not to miss anything of importance. The one unpleasant thing about the house, which struck me at once, was the appearance and conduct of the servants. There are only 2, a man and his wife. Toller, for that is his name, is a rough, uncouth man with grizzled hair and whiskers and a perpetual smell of drink. Twice since I have been with them he has been quite drunk, and yet Mr. Rucastle seems to take no notice of it. His wife is a very tall and strong woman with a sour face, as silent as Mrs. Rucastle and much less amiable. Oh, they are a most unpleasant couple, but fortunately I spend most of my time in the nursery in my own room. For 2 days after my arrival at the Copper Beeches, my life was very quiet. On the 3rd, however, Mr. Rucastle instructed me to change into the electric blue dress I would find laid out in my room, and then to present myself in the drawing room.
My dear Miss Hunter, come in, come in. How does the dress appeal to you?
Quite well, thank you.
Quite well, exceedingly well, in my opinion. Come over here, my dear young lady. Come into the light of the window. Oh, yes. Exceedingly well. Don't you think so, my dear?
Yes, I do.
My dear Miss Hunter, we're very much obliged to you for falling in with our whims, even so far as to cut your hair. But I assure you it has not detracted in the tiniest iota from your appearance. Now sit yourself down. In the window there, the chair behind you. No, don't move it. Leave the chair exactly where I set it. There now. With the light behind you. A picture. Perfect picture. Don't you think so, my dear?
Yes, but Jeffro,
I really must tell you the story behind that chair, Miss Hunter. I know it will amuse you.
This is very kind of you, Mr. Rucastle, but my duties, I should really be in the nursery with Edward.
Oh, nonsense. The dear little fellow will find plenty to do in your absence. Now, the chair. First of all, you should know it has been in my family for several generations. It was purchased by my great-great-great-grandfather, old Benjamin Rucastle, a well-known sportsman in his day. But precisely what sport he was noted for, delicacy forbids me to mention. But that is neither here nor there. No, what is more important was his extraordinary ability to drink a yard of ale and sing the national anthem at one and the same time.
But that's impossible.
But of course it is. But that's exactly why I was determined to try for myself. Oh, the hours of practice, oh, the ruined waistcoats. But gradually I began to master the art of paying homage to that most noble lady, whilst a mouthful of ale was gliding past my epiglottis.
Jeffro?
Yes, my dear.
It is 10 o'clock.
Oh, really? Oh, bless me, so it is. I hadn't realized.
Please don't stop.
It is time to commence your duties for the day. You may change your dress and go to little Edward in the nursery. That will be all, Miss Hunter.
How extraordinary.
And extremely interesting. I have no doubt the performance was repeated.
2 days later, under exactly similar circumstances. Again I changed my dress, again I sat in the window, and again I laughed very heartily at the funny stories of which my employer had an immense repertoire, and which he told inimitably. Then he handed me a yellow-backed novel, and moving my chair a little sideways that my own shadow should not fall upon the page, he begged me to read aloud to him. I did so for about 10 minutes, beginning in the heart of a chapter, and then suddenly, in the middle of a sentence, he ordered me to cease and to change my dress.
And the next occasion, did that differ in any way?
Not at all. You can easily imagine, Mr. Holmes, how curious I became as to what the meaning of this extraordinary performance could be. They were always so careful, I observed, to turn my face away from the window, so that I became consumed with the desire to see what was going on behind my back. At first it seemed impossible, but I soon devised a means.
But you see, being so grossly overweight not only made it somewhat difficult for the squire to get onto the horse's back, to say nothing of...
My hand mirror had been broken, so a happy thought seized me, and I concealed a piece of the glass in my handkerchief. On the next occasion, in the midst of my laughter, I put my handkerchief up to my eyes and was able, with a little management, to see all that there was behind me. I confess that I was disappointed. There was nothing. At least, that was my first impression. At the second glance, however, I perceived that there was a man standing in the Southampton Road, a small, bearded man in a grey suit, who seemed to be looking in my direction. The road is an important highway, and there are usually people there. This man, however, was leaning against the railings which bordered our field, and was looking in earnestly. I lowered my handkerchief and glanced at Mrs. Rucastle to find her eyes fixed upon me with a most searching gaze. She said nothing, but I am convinced that she had divined that I had a mirror in my hand and had seen what was behind me. She rose at once.
Jeffro, there is an impertinent fellow upon the road there who stares up at Miss Hunter.
No friend of yours, Miss Hunter?
No, I know no one in these parts.
Dear me, how very impertinent. Kindly turn round and motion him to go away.
Surely it would be better to take no notice.
No, we should have him loitering here always. Kindly turn round and wave him away.
I did as I was told, and at the same instant Mrs. Rucastle drew down the blind. That was a week ago, Mr. Holmes, and from that time I have not sat again in the window, nor have I worn the blue dress, nor seen the man in the road.
Now, pray continue. Your narrative promises to be a most interesting one.
You'll find it rather disconnected, I fear. And there may prove to be little relation between the different incidents of which I speak. On the very first day that I was at the Copper Beeches, Mr. Rucastle took me to a small outhouse which stands near the kitchen door.
This is what I especially wanted to show you, Miss Hunter. Look in here between the planks. Is he not a beauty? Don't be frightened. It's only Carlo, my mastiff. I call him mine, but really old Toller is the only man who can do anything with him. We feed him once a day, and not too much then, so that he's always keen as mustard. Toller lets him loose every night, and God help the trespasser whom he lays his fangs upon. Isn't that right, boy? Eh? Eh? So, my dear young lady, for goodness sake, don't you ever, on any pretext whatsoever, set your foot over this threshold at night, for it's as much as your life is worth.
And now I have a very strange experience to tell you, Mr. Holmes. I had, as you know, cut off my hair in London, and I had placed it in a great coil at the bottom of my trunk. One evening, after the child was in bed, I began to amuse myself by examining the furniture of my room and by rearranging my own little things. There was an old chest of drawers in the room, and having filled the 2 empty ones with some of my linen, to my annoyance found that the third was locked. So I took out my keys and found the very first one I tried fitted the lock to perfection. There was only one thing in the drawer, gentlemen. My coil of hair. It was of the same peculiar tint and the same thickness. But then the impossibility of the thing obtruded itself upon me. How could my hair have been locked in the drawer? With trembling hands, I undid my trunk, turned out the contents, and drew from the bottom my own hair. I laid the 2 tresses together, and I assure you, they were identical.
How amazing. What do you make of that, Holmes?
It fits a line of reasoning I've been contemplating. Were there any further incidents, Miss Hunter?
Just one. You may have already remarked that I am a particularly observant person, and I soon had a pretty good plan of the whole house in my head. There was one wing, however, which did not appear to be inhabited at all. One day, as I ascended the stair, I met Mr. Rucastle coming out through the door that led to a suite of unoccupied rooms. The look on his face made him very different from the round, jovial man to whom I was accustomed. His cheeks were red, his brow all crinkled with anger, and the veins stood out at his temples. He locked the door and hurried past me without a word or even a look. But when I met him in the garden less than 15 minutes after this incident, he was as merry as ever.
Ah, you must not think me rude if I passed you without a word. I was preoccupied with business matters.
Not at all, Mr. Rucastle, I fully understand.
Good. I shouldn't like to think of you as being upset in any way. Oh, dear, no.
By the way, you seem to have quite a suite of spare rooms up there, and one of them has the shutters up.
Yes, how right you are. Photography is one of my hobbies, you see. I've made my darkroom there. But, dear me, what an observant young lady we've come upon. Who would have believed it? Who would have ever believed it?
From the moment that I understood there was something about that suite of rooms which I was not to know, I was all on fire to go over them and keenly on the lookout for any chance to pass the forbidden door. It was only yesterday that the chance came. I may tell you that besides Mr. Rucastle, both Toller and his wife find something to do with those deserted rooms, and I once saw him carrying a large black linen bag through the door. Yesterday evening he was very drunk, and when I came upstairs, there was the key in the door. Mr. and Mrs. Rucastle were both downstairs, and the child was with them, so that I had an admirable opportunity. I turned the key gently in the lock, opened the door, and slipped through. There was a little passage in front of me, unpapered and uncarpeted, which turned at the farther end and led to 3 doors in a line, the first and third of which were open. They each led into an empty room, dusty and cheerless, with windows so thick with dirt that the evening light glimmered dimly through them. The centre door was closed, and across the outside of it had been fastened one of the broad bars from an iron bed, padlocked at one end to a ring on the wall, and fastened at the other with a stout cord. This barricaded door corresponded clearly with the shuttered window outside, and yet I could see by the glimmer from beneath it that the room was not in darkness. Evidently, there was a skylight that let in light from above. As I stood in the passage gazing at that sinister door and wondering what secret it might veil, I suddenly heard the sound of steps within the room and saw a shadow pass backward and forward. A mad, unreasoning terror rose up in me at the sight. My overstrung nerves failed me suddenly, and I turned and ran as though some dreadful hand were behind me, clutching at the skirt of my dress. I rushed down the passage, through the door, and...
So it was you, then? I thought it must be when I saw the door open.
Oh, I'm so frightened.
My dear young lady, my dear young lady. And what has frightened you, my dear young lady?
I was foolish enough to go into the empty wing, but it's so lonely and eerie in this dim light that I was frightened and ran out again. Oh, it's so dreadfully still in there.
Only that?
Why, what did you think?
Why do you think that I lock this door?
I'm sure that I have no idea.
It is to keep people out who have no business there. Do you see?
I'm sure that if I'd known...
Well, then, you know now. And if you ever put your foot over that threshold again, I'll throw you to the mastiff. Do I make myself clear, Miss Hunter?
I was so terrified that I do not know what I did. I suppose that I must have rushed past him into my room, for I remember nothing until I found myself lying on my bed, trembling all over. Then I thought of you, Mr. Holmes. I knew I could not live there longer without your advice. I was frightened of the house, of the man, of the woman, of the servants, even of the child. There. Now I have told you all my adventures. I should be grateful if you could tell me what it all means, and above all, what I should do.
An extraordinary story, Miss Hunter. Yes. Tell me, where is Toller today?
He's still drunk from last evening.
Excellent. And the Rucastles?
They are going on a visit later this afternoon and will be away all evening.
Perfect. Tell me, is there a cellar with a good strong lock at the Copper Beeches?
Yes, the wine cellar.
Now, you seem to me to have acted all through this matter like a very brave and sensible girl, Miss Hunter. Now, do you think that you could perform one more feat? I should not ask it of you if I did not think you quite an exceptional woman.
I'll try.
We shall be at the Copper Beeches by 7 o'clock, my friend and I. The Rucastles will be gone by that time, and Toller will, we hope, be incapable. There only remains Mrs. Toller, who might give the alarm. If you could send her into the cellar on some errand and then turn the key upon her, you would facilitate matters immensely.
I will do it.
Excellent. We shall then look thoroughly into the affair. Of course, there is only one feasible explanation. You've been brought here to personate someone, and the real person is imprisoned in this chamber. That is obvious. As to who the prisoner is, I have no doubt that it's the daughter, Miss Alice Rucastle, if I remember right, who was said to have gone to America. You were chosen, doubtless, as resembling her in height, figure, and the colour of your hair. Hers had been cut off, very possibly in some illness through which she'd passed, and so, of course, yours had to be sacrificed also. By a curious chance, you came upon her tresses.
Who do you suppose the man on the Southampton Road to be?
Well, undoubtedly some friend of hers, possibly her fiancé. No doubt, as you wore the girl's dress and were so like her, he was convinced from your laughter and afterwards from your gesture that Miss Rucastle was perfectly happy and that she no longer desired his attentions. As a further safeguard, the dog is let loose at night to prevent him from endeavouring to communicate with her. So much is fairly clear. The most serious point in the case, however, is the disposition of the child.
What on earth has that got to do with it?
My dear Watson, you as a medical man are continually gaining light as to the tendencies of a child by the study of the parents. Don't you see that the converse is equally valid? I have frequently gained my first real insight into the character of parents by studying their children. Now, this child's disposition is abnormally cruel, merely for cruelty's sake, and whether he derives this from his smiling father, as I should suspect, or from his mother, it bodes evil for the poor girl who is in their power.
I'm sure that you're right, Mr. Holmes. 1,000 things come back to me which make me certain that you've hit it. Let us not lose an instant in bringing help to this poor creature.
Indeed, but we must be circumspect, for we are dealing with an exceedingly cunning man. However, we can do nothing until 7 o'clock. At that hour we shall be with you, and it will not be long before we solve the mystery.
We were as good as our word, for it was just 7 when we reached the Copper Beeches, having put up our trap at a wayside public house. The group of trees, with their dark leaves shining like burnished metal in the light of the setting sun, were sufficient to mark the house, even had Miss Hunter not been standing smiling on the doorstep. Having established that Mrs. Toller was safely locked away in the wine cellar, whilst her husband lay snoring on the kitchen rug, we passed up the stair, unlocked the door to the uninhabited wing, followed on down a passage, and found ourselves in front of the barricade which Miss Hunter had described. Holmes cut the cord, removed the transverse bar, and then tried the various keys in the lock, but without success. No sound came from within, and at the silence, Holmes' face clouded over.
I trust we are not too late. Now, Watson, put your shoulder to it, and we shall see whether we can make our way in.
Just say the word.
Now! Empty.
There was someone in here, I swear it.
Oh, I don't doubt it for a moment. Bed, table, linen. There's been some villainy here. This beauty has guessed Miss Hunter's intentions and carried his victim off.
But how?
Yes, through the skylight. Help me with this table, Watson. That's it. Yes, we'll soon see how he managed it. Yes, here's the end of the ladder against the eaves. That's how he did it.
But it's impossible. The ladder was not there when the Rucastles went away.
He's come back and done it. I tell you that he's a clever and dangerous man. And I, for one, could certainly not be sure that...
The Rucastle!
I have your pistol ready, Watson.
Pistol?
Do not be alarmed. It's only a precaution.
What have you done, my dear young lady?
Isn't it a case of what you have done, Rucastle?
Who the devil are you?
Where is your daughter?
It is for me to ask you that. You thieves! Spies and thieves! I've caught you, haven't I? You're in my power. I'll serve you. You'll see. I'll serve you.
He's gone for the dog.
After it. Shut the front door after us, Miss Hunter. Watson, keep your pistol at the ready. Have a care, Watson. If you see the brute, do not hesitate. Shoot to kill. Stand clear, Holmes. Good shot. Well,
He's still alive. We'd better get him into the house.
his throat. Perhaps it would have been better. Kinder.
Fortunately, that is not a judgment we have been called upon to make. Take his legs, Holmes.
Very well.
Gently does it. That's it. It's better if you lead.
Right.
I'll try and support his head as best I can. Gently, Holmes, gently.
Right, Watson.
As we carried him into the house, I could not suppress the image of that huge, famished mastiff, its black muzzle buried in Rucastle's throat, while his victim writhed and screamed on the ground. We laid him on the drawing-room sofa, where I did what I could to relieve his pain. On discovering that Toller was, by now, comparatively sober, Holmes dispatched him to fetch the surgeon. It was whilst we were waiting for that gentleman to arrive that the door was suddenly opened and a tall, gaunt woman entered the room.
Mrs. Toller. But I thought...
Mr. Rucastle let me out, just before he went up to you. Ah, miss, 'tis a pity you didn't let me know what you were planning, for I would have told you that your pains were wasted.
It is clear that Mrs. Toller knows more about this matter than anyone else.
Yes, sir, I do, and I'm ready enough to tell what I know.
Well, then pray sit down and let us hear it. There are several points on which, I must confess, I am still in the dark.
I will soon make it clear to you, and I'd have done so before now if I could have got out from that cellar. If there's police court business over this, you'll remember I was the one that stood your friend, and that I was Miss Alice's friend too.
If there is further action to be taken in this matter, no doubt that will be considered. For the moment, you would be best advised to tell us all you know concerning Miss Rucastle.
She was never happy at home, Miss Alice wasn't, from the time her father married again. She was slighted like and had no say in anything. But it never really became bad for her until after she met Mr. Fowler at a friend's house and formed an attachment with him.
Was he the gentleman seen to be keeping watch on the house from the Southampton Road?
That's right, sir. As well as I could learn, Miss Alice had rights of her own by will, but she was so quiet and patient she was that she never said a word about them, but just left everything in Mr. Rucastle's hands. He knew he was safe with her. But when there was a chance of her husband coming forward, who would ask for all that the law would give him, then her father thought it was time to put a stop to it. He wanted her to sign a paper, so that whether she married or not, he could use her money. When she wouldn't do it, he kept on worrying her until she got brain fever, and for 6 weeks was at death's door. Then she got better at last, all worn to a shadow, and with her beautiful hair cut off. But that didn't make no change in her young man, and he stuck to her as true as a man could be.
What you've told us makes the matter fairly clear. I can deduce all that remains. Mr. Rucastle, then, I presume, took to this system of imprisonment.
Yes, sir.
And brought Miss Hunter down from London in order to get rid of the disagreeable persistence of Mr. Fowler.
That was it, sir.
But Mr. Fowler, being a persevering man, blockaded the house, and, having met you, succeeded by certain arguments, metallic or otherwise, in convincing you that your interests were the same as his.
Mr. Fowler was a very kind-spoken, free-handed gentleman.
And in this way he managed that your good man should have no want of drink, and that a ladder should be ready at the moment when your master had gone out.
You have it, sir. That's just the way it happened.
I'm sure we owe you an apology, Mrs. Toller. You've certainly cleared up everything which puzzled us. If I'm not mistaken, that must be Toller now, arriving with the surgeon. As I feel there is nothing left for us to do here, Watson, I think we had best escort Miss Hunter back to Winchester. It seems to me that our locus standi now is rather a questionable one.
Thus was solved the mystery of the sinister house with the copper beeches. Mr. Rucastle survived, but was always a broken man, kept alive solely through the care of his devoted wife. They still live with their old servants, who probably know so much of Rucastle's past life that he finds it difficult to part from them. Mr. Fowler and Miss Rucastle were married by special license in Southampton the day after their flight, and he is now the holder of a government appointment on the island of Mauritius. As to Miss Violet Hunter, my friend Holmes, rather to my disappointment, manifested no further interest in her once she had ceased to be the center of one of his problems. She is now the head of a private school at Walsall, where, I believe, she has met with considerable success.
In The Copper Beeches, Sherlock Holmes was played by Clive Merrison and Dr. Watson by Michael Williams. Violet Hunter was played by Imogen Stubbs and Geoffrey Rucastle by Roger Hammond. With Joanna Myers as Mrs. Rucastle, Jenny Howe as Miss Stoper, and Elizabeth Kelly as Mrs. Toller. The violinist was Leonard Friedman. The Copper Beeches was dramatized for radio by Peter Mackie and directed by Enid Williams.